Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Be Unbound podcast. I'm Ben Billups. I'm the brand spanking new marketing guy for Unbound. And this week, I'm joined once again by our CEO, Jonathan Brush, and also joined by our Chief Operations Officer, Megan Weber. A lot of familiar faces this week. We have new updates coming very, very soon for the new program. And we also have new updates coming very, very soon for the local events that we've promised in place of Apex, which we unfortunately had to cancel due to the coronavirus uptick in recent weeks. And I know Jonathan had something that he wanted to say in response to all of that as well.
Yeah, so first of all, welcome everybody, and thanks for the intro, Ben. I just wanted to mention that having to cancel Apex was one of the most excruciating decisions I've ever had to make, and so it was no fun. And so I put out that video last week and had to tell everybody what happened and all those things. And mostly, I just wanted to say how grateful I was to the community's response. We got a lot of fantastic letters and emails and text messages from people just saying they were praying for us and thanking us for making a hard decision and just sort of standing behind us. And that made a really hard decision so much easier. So I just mostly want to take a chance to just say how grateful we were for this community and for your response, how sorry we were that we had to cancel it, and that we're working really hard to come up with an alternative. And we'll be excited to announce that to you soon. But at this point, just to tell you thanks, because it was really an exceptional response, and it made a tough decision for us a lot easier. So thanks, guys.
Absolutely. It's a great reminder as to just what kind of community that we're in. It's a really exceptional community.
Absolutely.
Well, this week, in the meantime, while you guys are waiting for all the new details, which we're working very hard on for Apex and the new program, we just decided it would be fun to do a brief history of Unbound. So any of you guys out there who are new or who maybe are only a year or two old, you probably at this point, if you've been around for at least a year, you understand that 1 year in Unbound time is about 100 years in any other community or organization. And so things happen. They happen fast and they change a lot. And this one of those big changes just happened recently. So I think it'd be good just for the history books to kind of put something down on record as a nice kind of brief linear progression, keep everybody on the same page. So we have a series of just questions. I think the first one is pretty basic, and this one's for Jonathan, which is just kind of like, where did all of this begin? And I think, there's some listeners out there who are probably remembering the old days of CollegePlus.
Yeah, so that was the beginning. And, it's kind of a fun story. If you've been with us for a while and we kind of joke about the brand changes and name changes and things like that, and there's some frustration inherent to that as well. But also, it's an interesting story of entrepreneurship. It's an interesting story of innovation and some of the risks that come when you kind of are innovating in front of everybody else, because you have to sort of, educate an entire market about what's going on. And so CollegePlus actually started in March of 2004. The original founders are Brad Voller, Woody Robertson, and Ryan Yamani. And what happened was that Brad Voller was interested in doing missions work, and he wanted to do it in South Korea. And he realized that in order to be taken seriously in South Korea, he needed a degree. So he crunched the numbers and was like, well, by the time I earn a degree and spend all the money for this thing, I won't have money to go do missions work anymore. So Brad was kind of one of these people that didn't like to do things normally. And so he kind of looked around and said, well, how can I hack this? And he wound up, Brad is legitimately a genius. He's an absolutely incredible person and a brilliant person. And he wound up figuring out a way to earn his entire college degree in 6 months. And he did it for like $10,000. And so he earned his degree. He's ready set to go. And people were like, that's crazy. That's incredible. You have to tell us how he did that. And so he said, okay. So, we spent a little extra time. He wrote a book about it. Because, if you're a genius and you earn a degree in 6 months, you can easily write a book, right? So he wrote a book, and he kind of went on the homeschool convention circuit because he was homeschooled. And he's had a connection to that community. And he went in that circuit and he sold the book. And he thought, well, I'll make some money for my mission stuff, right? And so he sold the book and made some money, and he went to South Korea to do missions work. And then he kind of would come back and he'd go back to these conventions next year. And what he started figuring out was when he'd come back, people were like, I read the book, but how'd you do that again? Because it turns out not everybody's geniuses like Brad, right? And so he brought in some guys he knew, Woody and Ryan, and together they kind of built around this program, a system of how to do it. And then they started a coaching program so that people could figure out how to do it. So like, this is the information how to do it, and then here's somebody to help you do the program. And they called it CollegePlus. And they launched it, and for the first several years, they just couldn't keep up. It just exploded, and they had a lot of great partners in the homeschool space. And they kind of hit this time where homeschoolers were like, yeah, like we just figured out how to hack the system for regular education. Now somebody came along and told us how we can hack college too. Let's do it. And so they did that. I joined the group in 2010, so actually about March of 2010. And so things were kind of rolling along. And then somewhere in there, one of the things that happened with CollegePlus was that there was a lot of great success and nobody really understood what the success was there for. So there's a little bit of overextension because people thought the success was kind of permanent. And then there's some market shifts and you kind of missed that. And CollegePlus was a little bit interesting in that it was out in the very front edge of things. And so there wasn't a lot of other places, other companies like it that they could follow and say, hey, watch what happens to them and then learn from their mistakes. They were kind of out there making all the mistakes on their own the first time. And they were not only trying to, run a company, they were trying to market an idea that was pretty new. I mean, think about, starting back at that time, 2004, and talk about online education. I mean, when I joined in 2010, online education was still kind of a brand new thing. People just weren't used to that at all. And so because of that, it was easy to kind of run off the tracks because there weren't any tracks. They were kind of, it was uncharted territory. And so through the years, some different mistakes were made, a little bit of overextension, a little bit of adjustments here and there, until it reached a point kind of around 2015, somewhere in there, where they had a couple opportunities and weren't sure which way to go. And they had a need to kind of bring in some capital because they'd overextended, made some decisions that didn't work out quite the way they expected. And so they're running a little bit on fumes from a capital side. And they also had some people come to them and said, hey, you're doing this in this Christian homeschool space. You could actually take this to the world and it could be a lot bigger. So they brought in some new partners and that's when they rebranded to Lumerit. And at the entire time this was going on, the actual company that ran CollegePlus is called Global Learning Resources. CollegePlus is kind of the brand. And so they rebranded Global Learning Resources to Lumerit. And then for a little bit, CollegePlus continued on as the brand. But then it became obvious that we needed both a consumer brand, and then we were also going out to big corporations and doing tuition assistance programs, corporations like Verizon and UPS and things like that. And so there was also a need for a rebranding of the consumer brand. And so that's when the CollegePlus got rebranded to Unbound. And so that brings us up kind of almost the current day because eventually Lumerit was acquired by another company, and so it was sold to a larger company. And then in very recent days, the Unbound brand, so the consumer part of the division, specifically the consumer part of the division, focusing on kind of the Christian worldview market, was turned into a new company, and that's how we got to here. So that's kind of a fast, as Ben said, 1 year can be like several centuries. So that's kind of a millennial worth of history for how CollegePlus eventually became Unbound, and it got to the point where we are today.
Yeah, that's a great overview. And I think there's a lot of good stuff that we can dive into there for the rest of this podcast. And I think one of the things that's top of mind, I mean, this is something that I'm curious about too, that I'd love to hear from Megan on, which is basically just sort of like, when did the community really start to come together? Because I remember when I joined, maybe I just wasn't informed. I became a student around 2014. And it seemed like it was right around that time when the community started to really come together. But I wanted to hear it from you.
Yeah, so the community actually goes back to 2006. That's when those original founders put together a forum, and they really did it just so students could share study tips. At that time, students were taking a lot of credit by exam, and so as they would go in and pass an exam, posting their feedback on study resources and topics to focus on. So that was a huge piece of the forums at that point. But as people were sharing study tips and getting on there, they started to connect and say, oh, when's your test date? I'll be praying for you, or let me know how it goes, or you're just starting this too. Great, keep me posted. So relationships started to form. And right about 2008, we actually have the first record. It sounds like a big historical record, but the first evidence of students getting together, meeting up in person. That happened up in Minnesota. And after that, similar to how it is today, students meeting up was just something that couldn't be stopped. So in 2009, the forums exploded in terms of connection, and people just started sharing all kinds of life. That was the start of what is still a super popular thread now called Random Thoughts. That just became the place to get on every day and share what had happened to you, share your deepest thoughts, connect with other people. The forums continued to grow through 2010, and I didn't start until 2011. So by the time I got on, there was a ton to go back and read. And you could see these common threads at that point of what we see in the community today, which is trust, a willingness and desire to go deeper in conversation. And that's just really cool to go back and see. So up until about 2013, everything was unofficial. So students did meet up. Students would have others come over their homes and do week-long gatherings. But it was in 2013 that the company was like, we really want to invest in this. So they planned the first weekend retreats. We called them gatherings, and they happened in California and Texas late 2013. It was after that, Jonathan came to the student body and said, I planned those. I will never plan another one again, but I will help you continue planning these. So we started to do what became Apex. It was originally called CPE3 in 2014 and 2015. And then starting in 2016, it became the Apexes. So we've had, this year would have been 7. So we've had 6 so far. This year will be a new year as well, as we turn them into regional events. The community really grew from there. In 2015, things exploded. After having 80 people meet in person in Texas in the fall of 14, 15 became a bunch of events and a bunch of travel, and there were empower calls, and there were some more connection on Facebook. 16 saw a large Apex, larger than anything we had before, and also a new location. We moved out of Texas to Baltimore. In 17, we moved up to Michigan for Apex, which is one of our, it's been our longstanding camp now, but that was the largest Apex we've ever had. And ever since then, continuing to grow, we've refined Engage events, and the Facebook group has continued to grow to, I think it's over 1,100 people now. And the forums that have been around since the very beginning continue to grow and be that place of great student connection and sharing those study tips. So that's a little bit about where the community has come from and how it got here.
Awesome. Yeah, it seemed, it's funny. I just remember going to, I believe it was the 2015 Apex, or it may have been the 2014 one. It was the first one I attended. And I just remember I walked into a room, and for the first time, it was like almost everyone in the room was asking me what my 5-year plan was. And I'd never had that experience before, right? It's like everybody was like, what's your plan for your life? This is my plan for my life. And it's like, whether or not that's what really happened, the thing that just completely boggled me was that I was in a room full of people who actually wanted to have a plan for their life, which is surprisingly uncommon. And so that was kind of the moment where I was like, I think it's probably smart if I just want to stick around with these guys. They seem like smart people who would probably be good friends. So I remember that experience. And then obviously being a part of the cabinet and, at a later date and everything is just, it's been a really interesting ride. But I'd also just like to hear some of it from your perspective, Jonathan, just like the evolution of the community over time. What's that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, it's been an interesting run as well. For me, I came from a background of traditional higher education. So I had worked as a director of admissions for about 12 years for a private college. I worked for the same college I graduated from. So I was very involved in the community there. And was in charge of various student groups and teams and advisor for different groups, and had been really active in student life on campus when I was a student there, and, I had different leadership positions. I'd also done some part-time youth ministry and some junior high ministry. So I was, I was familiar with working through churches. And my church is the church I belong to as districts. We have like 103 congregations in our district, and then a national level. And I'd help plan youth conferences and district stuff for them through college. Even when I was in high school, I was on a national youth cabinet that planned our big events, and then continued serving in some of those leadership capacities even after I graduated from college and on into working for the college and things like that. So I had a background of doing all those things. So then I started with this little CollegePlus sort of startup that was sort of trundling along. And my job at the time was to travel around the country and speak to people and recruit people for it. So I'd blow into town, and we'd organize a couple of events, and I'd speak to everywhere from like 6 people in a church basement to 400 people in an auditorium somewhere. And I'd be eating lunch with the people that organized this. I was meeting all these students, and I was also doing all these conventions. And so I was on the road a ton and meeting a bunch of people. And I'd never met anybody like them. And I say that, and I gave you that background because I knew a lot of students. I mean, I've been working with students my entire career in this age group. And these students were just totally unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And I'd always ask them the same 2 questions. I'd say, hey, what's the worst thing we've done to you in this program? And, they'd say some different things. So what's the best thing about it, And so what was interesting was the worst thing was always around, there were some minor details, but almost always people would say the worst thing is people have no idea what I'm talking about. Like I don't know anybody like me. Like I'm isolated. I'm doing this and I don't even know nobody understands why I want to do this thing. Because remember, like 2010, online education was still brand spanking new, right? And it was really, people like, you can do college online? What is that? Mm-hmm. And so then I'd drive 3 hours away and I'd meet someone who'd be like their twin sister. And they'd be saying the same things and act the same way. And I'm thinking, man, I mean, for some reason, we're attracting these really cool people. If we could get them all in the same room, this would be amazing. And so we're sitting at a convention. Casey Frisky and I are sitting at a convention. She was working for us at the time. And it was a little slow. And we're kind of sitting there dreaming about like what we like to do. And I don't know which of us said it. It's probably Casey. And she said, it'd be really awesome if we could have like a national conference, a national convention. Because at the time, as Megan said, there was a forums. But for various reasons, which we won't get into now, the forums kind of almost existed aside from the company. Like they were almost a separate entity, and so there was nothing really coming from the company itself. And so we said, that'd be really cool. And so this was one of those times where there's a big market turn happening in our space. And we were missing the turn, in my opinion. And so I went back to the founders and I said, hey, guys, I really think we need to bring students together. And, they had a lot going on. And so to them, that just sounded like a lot of risk. And what I mean by that is that, they've got 10,000 things happening. A couple things are on fire, a market turn they're missing. And things are just feeling pretty stressful. And then this guy comes out of the woodwork and like, hey, we should have a live event. And they're just thinking, when somebody breaks their leg and gets hurt and something, like, what's that going to look like? And they said, I just don't really think it's a good idea. And it wasn't so much they were opposed to the idea. It was just seemed like a lot of complication. So finally I said, hey, tell you what, let me go ahead and do this. I'll plan it. I'll take care of it. I'll put it all together. I'll work with some folks and we'll get it done. But if it goes badly, I'll take the responsibility for it, and it's on me. And you can fire me or whatever. I'll resign, but I'll take the accept responsibility. Now, I don't really think that would have ever happened. I can't imagine those guys ever actually doing that. But it was more like to shut me up. They're like, okay, dude, whatever. Just just do this thing and let's see how it goes. And so so we did these gatherings, and we did them in California and Texas. And immediately I thought, wow. And Megan mentioned this. I can do this once, but I'm just not going to be able to stay in touch fast enough to kind of keep up with students and what their needs are. So what if we could take this and do it in such a way that students could sort of figure these things out in the future? And so from that came Student Life and the Student Cabinet, and then, of course, the national event. And what was interesting about that was that, that turning it over to students, everything kind of changed. And it was really interesting. Megan can tell you that there was a divide in the community at the time. There was people that didn't want the company to kind of get their hands involved in student life when they were doing these unofficial things. And there's people who didn't want to come to unofficial gatherings because it felt a little strange and they weren't really used to the forums and stuff like that. And so, believe it or not, it was really controversial to start Student Life. It was controversial with our leadership of the company. It was controversial with the students. And at times, I felt like everybody hated my guts for trying to do this just because it was so different. But then we got that first CP3. We had the cabinet. We deliberately picked people from the cabinet from both camps. Megan's grinning because they fought like cats and dogs the entire time, but yet they all believed in the bigger mission. They created that first event. The CP3 was, of course, CP for CollegePlus, and the 3 E's were engage, equip, and empower. And we wanted to kind of sort of run that theme through the event. And we did so. And like you noted, Ben, it was like when people walked in the room, they're like, oh, for the first time ever, I don't have to explain who I am. Nobody's going to ask me what I'm doing for college. And there was just this tremendous sense of coming home. And what happened after that was that it really went organic, right? Like after that, when people knew each other, then all kinds of things came out of it, many of which were things I didn't predict and I didn't think would actually work. And a lot of things I thought would work didn't, and the things I didn't think it would work did. But the key was that students started planning their own thing. And then somewhere around, I don't know, probably about 2016, I remember having a meeting with Megan and I said, I think we've got what I would call a self-perpetuating culture here. In other words, there's enough momentum going that this thing is creating its own stuff. It doesn't need a lot of input. Now it needs vision and it needs assistance, but there's a culture here that's being created by the students themselves, and it's a pretty amazing group. So that's kind of how the way it looked at from our end. It was kind of like there's a need, and then we kind of lit a match, and then we kind of stood back, and from then on, it was just kind of tending the fire. It really took off on its own, and it's been something that students have mostly created and built and invested in and sort of guided. And that's been really unique. And I, to this day, I've still not seen anything like it. I've never been involved with a group of students that act like and interact with each other like this group does. It's in my experience, totally unique. And I have some pretty broad experience working with this age range. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. That's really interesting context too. I think, it seems like that brings us up to around 2019. Because we've talked about sort of like what led to Unbound. We've talked about the community, the evolution over time. I think another thing that some of the students are curious about is just sort of what led to the Pearson acquisition. I think this is probably these next two questions. I'd love to hear from Jonathan on, and then Megan, feel free to chime in as you want. But
yeah, so there's a lot to be said, and there's probably too much details to make this an interesting podcast. So we'll kind of keep it general. Mm-hmm. But there was a couple different dreams, and there was some conflicting complications through this, right? And so, remember, CollegePlus started, and it was unlike anything anybody ever seen before. Nobody thought about doing college this way. Nobody was really using online college this way. Nobody's using credit by exam this way. Nobody was thinking about basically unbundling college education. I worked at a college, right? I'd never heard of anybody that took classes at 18 different places and put them together. We called that a failure, right? that was a screwed up way to do school. And that was just the predominant thought. I mean, like consumers thought that, students thought that, parents thought that, administrators thought that. So you got to recognize that these guys are clear out here past the bleeding edge, right? Just completely making it up, and not only having to figure out how it all worked, but then explain to everybody. I remember the early days of CollegePlus going out and be like, look, everything you know about college, forget it. And now I'm going to have to rebuild all of this for you. And that was like every call that we did to try to enroll somebody. We had to basically blow up everything they knew about higher education and explain why this worked. And then the people that signed up, and some of them were listening, they took a whale of a risk, right? I mean, like they were kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to throw out everything I ever knew about college. I'm going to do it differently and hope these guys are right. And so that was kind of what was going on. And, you pick up some lumps and bruises doing it that way. You have to go down some paths that work and some ones that don't. And for the most part, they picked the right paths, but they picked some wrong ones. And those wrong ones cost money and build up some debt and things like that. And so we're to the point where it was like, wow, man, the company's looking around going, we have to find a way to dramatically scale in order to be able to kind of pay off some of these bad bets that we made, right? When we were trying to figure things out, when everything was new and there wasn't any blazed path and we were making our own path. And some of those led to cliffs. And so to do that, we had some folks come in and say, hey, you're kind of in this tiny market over here. You could go out and you could sign up a corporation and think about it. You could sign up one contract and you could have tens of thousands of students instead of going one by one. And that's where the whole LeMerit thing came in and stuff. Well, when you did that, you needed scale and you need investors for that. And you need people that bring in capital that allow you to do those systems fast. Because you can't go to Verizon and say, hey, we're doing this kind of the seat of our pants, figuring out as we go along. Like you can with consumers, right? Like where consumers like, okay, well, as long as it works for me, it's fine. Verizon, you got somebody in a C-suite saying, I want to see the whole system work. And to do that, we needed investment money. Well, when you start bringing in that kind of investment and that kind of money, you bring in people that say, I'm in this to do two things. I'm in this to change higher education. And there was definitely a missional aspect to it, but it went broader than just a Christian worldview. It was like, I want to totally rethink about how colleges are done in the United States and higher education is done. But I want my money back. People, I'm giving this money because I'm expecting a return. And when you get to that point, there's a certain angle in there, there's a certain spot in there when the only way to do that is to get to a point of sale because you have to continue to scale it, right? And so, you either need to bring in enormous amounts of outside capital or you need to partner with somebody who has that capital to take it to scale. And that's kind of what happened. LeMerit got to the point where those things were necessary. It was necessary to either bring in a huge amount of capital or sell to somebody who had the capital to take it up, right? And Pearson ended up being that partner. And that was able to satisfy the investors who had already been in and also to bring a company with the resources to kind of make the business model work at scale. And it's important for people to understand that because, if you're in this and you're from the Christian worldview community, a lot of this looks kind of confusing and why they do that. There were reasons for that. And some of those are because they were pioneers and they were out there and they were going where nobody had gone before and they were kind of making up as they went along and they got a lot right, but they made some mistakes. And eventually that had to all kind of be figured out, right? And that required some sale and some capital raising and all that kind of stuff. And as we got to the point. Now, the exciting thing is in the process of that and through a whole convoluted series of, I would almost say miracles, we got to the point where LeMerit was able to do that and they're able to continue doing that. And that's good for changing higher education. But Unbound has been able to continue. And that's a pretty remarkable thing. I mean, like if you really think about that, we've been able to sort of benefit from all these things everybody got right early. We've been able to kind of walk away from some of the mistakes they got covered in the sale, right? And we got kind of a blank slate to do this again, having learned those lessons and having kind of a new vision going forward. So to me, that's an exciting history. It's a history of some twists and turns. And from the outside going, why do we keep changing our name? Well, there was actually some reasons for that. And there were reasons that were pretty compelling. And some of them were survival reasons. And so, yeah, we got the name change a couple of times, but yet a company that came with an idea of doing education in a way nobody ever thought of before, started in 2004, is still running. That's pretty amazing, and a testament to Brad and Woody and Ryan and those guys early on, and then a lot of people who worked on it through the years. So, that's kind of the other side of the confusion, is just there's also a remarkable story of success and changed lives that's come through this whole thing.
Absolutely. I think, and that's one of the things I think is really exciting. It's just the overwhelming response that I've heard both from Pearson and from students, and even from former staff, is just that this is a positive thing in every direction. Yeah. And I think that's something that's really exciting. And on the one hand, you can say that the business that we're working on right now is a startup. But on the other hand, you could say it's really not, because we're working with, almost, 20 years worth of lessons, and we have that and the experience and all the former employees that we have access to and everything, all of that wisdom, it didn't just disappear when this happened. And so I think, both Pearson and Unbound are in a really good position to flourish in the next few years, just taking all of those lessons forward. So I think let's start with Megan on this one. But this will be the last question, which is just, so given all of that, all these transitions, all the twists and turns, and the wonderfully confusing history of Unbound, where do you see the community going in the next few years?
Yeah, I think the community now has the opportunity to embrace even more of what's made it successful. In a lot of the ways the community wasn't planned for. CollegePlus and then Lumerit didn't go into this to build a community. And yet it's one of the things that all three of us have gotten to appreciate and benefit from, and see the remarkableness of how it's grown in a lot of ways organically, with some pivots along the way. And so I'm excited to see us now be able to embrace what's made the community itself, the trust that students have, the uniquenesses they share, the dedication to doing things differently and thinking outside the box, and be able to bring in more students who think that way. Not just anybody, but really recruiting students who will fit in with the community we have and grow that. That's always been something I've been excited about.
Absolutely. And Jonathan?
Yeah, you might fasten your seatbelt for this. So, because I got kind of two levels of answers. One is very much what Megan said, right? At one point early on, I kind of posited to the founders, I said, I wonder if we ought to be a life purpose planning company that happens to do college instead of a college company that happens to do life purpose planning. And, the answer to that was kind of went the other direction. It became a college that did life purpose planning, and I emphasized that. In some ways, this is kind of flipping that again. And I might say it this way. This is a program that's built on a community that happens to offer college credit. And that's a different focus. And it's something that people should kind of notice, that before, the community was kind of the optional bolt-on thing, but it was really amazing. Now we're putting that front and center and saying, hey, the majority of the value here is the community. We'll still help you get a degree without debt. We'll still help you do college differently. We'll still help you reinvent college. But you got to do it with the community. And I think that's really important, because my vision for this is that we let students, we create an opportunity for students to be extraordinarily well trained and equipped for being able to do regular life way better than everybody else. We say that, we're wanting to equip you to the ordinary, extraordinary well. I want you to be the Navy SEALs of everyday life, right? I want you to be able to, everybody has to do life. I want our students to be able to do life so much better, just like, everybody in the military has one mission, but the Navy SEALs really do that better because they're selected and trained for that. So folks in this program are going to be selected and trained to be really, 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 really good at normal life in an exceptional way. And think about the power then of being part of a network like that. Think about the advantages that gives you. I want to give you an unfair advantage in life, because I want you to be not only equipped, but I want you for really the rest of your life to be able to tap in this network of people that are equipped like you are. And so if you're looking for business partners, if you're looking for employees, if you're looking for contacts, if you're looking for a job, if you're looking for services, if you're looking for legal help, if you're looking, I want you to be able to find it. And these people say, yeah, I get you. I understand you. Just like it was when we walked in that first CPU3, it's like, Everybody here understands me. I want to give you a community that says, oh yeah, we know where you came from and we know what you can do. And therefore we know how to help you. And then this is the buckle your seatbelt part. I don't want this to sound comic because I'm really serious about this, even though it's really big, right? But I see this as like an essential building block to rebuilding Western civilization. And if that sounds really huge and kind of like roll your eyes, hang with me here. I think that, there's never a time in history when there's not been a crisis. There's no golden age, right? There's always a big challenge. Well, we've got a big challenge. We've got big cultural challenges. We've got big challenges as a country and as a world and things like that. And I think that you fix those by building locally. So think about this. This is a program that allows you to stay local, right? The place where you've invested all your time and energy for the last 18 years, you don't have to abandon those communities and connections, that church and that place you live and all those kinds of things. You get to stay there, and yet you still get to connect to this elite national network of people and all that brings with it. And then you get trained to act locally, which is where I think differences is made, right? And I think of this in a long term. Is this going to change the world in 10 years? No. In 20 years? No. In a lifetime? Well, I hope we see the needle move a little bit. I'm talking about longer than that. I'm talking about the kinds of things that are almost multi-generational, because I think as Christians, we can think that way. And it lays the groundwork for that. So what would it be like if we could seed a bunch of people throughout our culture who just really understand these things and are extraordinarily good at ordinary things, and they're able to teach other people around them those things and bless them with those things? And where does it go? That's the question I want to answer. That's what gets me absolutely fired up, excited about this. And that's what just is my driving force in making this happen from here on out.
So Ben, you asked for a few-year plan and Jonathan gave you the multi-generational plan.
The multi-generational, yeah. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You not only can earn a degree, but you can participate in rebuilding civilization. That's the vision. I will have to look again to see if that was in my job description, but it's probably in there somewhere. And this has been really
Jonathan wrote them.
Yeah, exactly. This has been really fun. Thank you, Megan and Jonathan, for joining the podcast this week. The next couple of installments of the podcast will include some big updates. Some of those are about Apex. Some of them are about the future of the community. And some of them are about new programs and courses that we're going to be rolling out as a part of the business. So definitely don't want to miss those. I hope you guys enjoyed this short review of the history of Unbound. And as always, you can email us at podcast@beunbound.us if you have any ideas, topics, or suggestions. And with that, we will catch you guys next week.